1:30, we're sticking with the theme of Jeremy Corbyn. Michael from Hale, not a fan of Mr. Corbyn's, but Paul Farmer is a Momentum activist here in Cornwall. And obviously you are a fan of Mr. Corbyn, Paul. How do you respond to the accusation that Jeremy Corbyn, an IRA sympathiser, somebody who has stood up for terrorists, and someone like Michael in Hale simply can't stomach that?
Yeah, I'm afraid I think Michael in Hale has been sold a pup by the kind of exposure this sort of issue gets given by a media not like yourself, but with an agenda which is not shared by Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was a pioneer in actually addressing the issues of the Troubles in north of Ireland and in Ireland generally, and he actually engaged in conversation with people he probably rather not have spoken to on all sides of the divisions there in order to bring about peace. And it was Sinn Féin with whom Jeremy Corbyn was engaging, a legal political party who is now one of the governing parties in the north of Ireland. So this is misleading. Somebody had to bring about peace. In order to bring about peace, we often have to talk to people that we'd rather not talk to, because they're our enemies. How are we going to reconcile with our enemies if we don't talk to them?
I suppose some people could ask that question of our own politicians, since it's the politicians in the UK that seem to be polarising the people. They talk about each other with such utter disdain that sometimes you would think they were talking about murderers rather than somebody in an opposition political party.
I think that has become a tradition in British politics, and not just British politics, but in many parts of the world. But of course, this is the kind of thing which Jeremy Corbyn takes a stand against. We are forbidden from engaging in personal badinage with people with whom we disagree politically, and this is good. I mean, we all get the urge to have a good go at someone, you know, and really, it's not adding to a serious debate about how we run our country, what the values of our country are. Personal attacks are irrelevant. Jeremy Corbyn stands against them, and you're quite right. They're polarising, and they polarise for no good purpose. We've got to set political discussion in a much better tone from now on. We've got to stop this country being like it's become. It's become a place where it's quite acceptable for billionaires to buy a newspaper and then tell outright distortions in order to label other people. I mean, you know, the case of the issue that Michael was discussing there. Now, you know, that was however we might define it as a civil war, or however else we might define that conflict. You know, that was a very serious issue, and to actually misrepresent what was going on there and how it came to an end is to split up our communities for no good purpose. What does it gain in terms of the future of our country or Ireland? It doesn't help either. So we need to stop polarising things artificially by insulting each other.
Tamsin, speaking to Mr. Corbyn a little bit earlier, asked him why he wasn't here during the actual election campaign, and with respect, he didn't respond to that specific question.
Yeah.
Are you sorry that he didn't come here during that campaign? Do you feel that things could have been different?
But to be in a political party, mainstream political party in Britain in the spring and early summer of this year was to be thrown into absolute chaos. When the general election was called, I was out campaigning every day for the local government elections, and suddenly we've got to fight two elections at the same time. Now, this is an ordinary member at the time. I wasn't a member of it. I wasn't an officer at all. I was just someone standing for Cornwall Council and traipsing the streets. Suddenly, I had to cope with two elections, and I had trouble. Now, the leader of the party of opposition, who had no part in calling this election. Remember, we were told the last Parliament would sit until 2020, and we were guaranteed it by the 5-year Parliament Act. And suddenly, we find we're in a general election now. You can't be everywhere. He's one person, and he's pretty good at getting around. I mean, as we saw during the campaign, he got to 3 or 4 places in the same day. There's logistical issues. How do you get down to Cornwall, manage to be everywhere that you need to be in order to be controlling this campaign? I'd have loved it if he would have come. It would have been such a kick. But we're a Cornish constituency, and we fight things in a Cornish way, and leave us to it, and we'll get on with the job. And we did get on with the job, and we nearly overturned a substantial majority, and next time we will.
When I first came to Cornwall, which is nearly 16 years ago now...
a new boy.
Yeah, a new boy. Candy Atherton, of course, was an MP, the only Labour MP representing Cornwall, and there has been an accusation for many years that Cornwall is ignored by Labour and was ignored at that time because it wasn't a Labour county, because there was only one seat. And as hard as Candy would fight, and she did a tremendous amount of work with Europe, she couldn't get central government in London to build us a new hospital. She couldn't get them to set aside the historical debt of RCHT. And people still feel like politicians come to Cornwall, promise the earth, go away and do nothing.
The Labour Party has undergone a massive transformation since 2015, and since Jeremy Corbyn, to our great surprise, became leader of the party, and I came to join the party. During this sort of transition, we've basically become the party of the people who stand on the doorsteps and say, oh, all politicians are the same. We've all joined now to make sure that all politicians aren't the same. The reason why I make this point is because we need to know who we're speaking to. When we're calling for righteous things, like Cornwall to be treated fairly, like Cornwall to be funded fairly, across the board, who is it who's listening to these arguments? Now, I want that to be Jeremy Corbyn, because I think he does listen. There, as Mebby and Kernow have been arguing for years, Cornwall's different and needs to have better structures to administer itself, like, for example, our own assembly. I want Jeremy Corbyn to be empowered to hear those arguments so we can arrange things so that Cornwall doesn't feel left behind, so that Cornwall isn't left behind in the future. And he would be a much better person to be talking to than the people who have administered Britain before.
Do you think visits like this help the cause of Labour?
They undoubtedly do. There's something going on. There's something huge going on in Britain, in Cornwall, as we saw at the recent election. There's something big going on. These are the opportunities for people to come and actually become involved in this and to see what it's all about. Now, if you go and see Jeremy Corbyn speak, you suddenly realise this little bloke, he comes on the stage and he talks to you straight, and he just says things you can understand. He's talking about complex politics, but he says it to you in ways you understand, and you form your own assessments when you see people, and so on, and they become a focus. The last time Jeremy came at Heartlands, over 3,000 people, the police estimated unofficially on the day, came along. Now, they weren't all Labour Party supporters, but a lot of them will have joined now, and they do feel involved. And our politicians need to speak to us. They need to be in front of us. We need to know, to get a sense of who they are beyond what we're presented with on the television.
You say he speaks straightforwardly, and I'll be honest with you, there was a time when Jeremy first became leader of Labour, he did seem to do that, but I would say over the last year, that speech has become political spin again, so that when somebody says to him directly, do you condemn what is happening in Venezuela, he goes around the houses again, like all politicians do. I condemn all sides of instead of going, yes, I do, or no, I don't. What happened to that Jeremy Corbyn?
I just think that Jeremy Corbyn got pulled up on everything he said, misrepresented all the time, and so now he's more careful with it. I mean, the thing about...
But then he's not the straight-speaking guy you were talking about then. Yeah, he's changed. He's been forced to change.
He is. If you watch someone taking part in an election at a kind of constituency level, like we had a candidate Graham during the election campaign, and you see people that develop and find an ability to speak in a way which doesn't sound so hesitant, communicates as effectively as possible, and gives people that feeling that this is actually someone on whom we can invest our trust and our faith. And this is all part of a kind of process of experience. And to suddenly become someone as significant as he's becoming, and it's a peculiar phenomenon what's happened to Jeremy Corbyn. There he was elected, and we were all surprised and we were delighted, but this man, with what he represented and the kind of attitudes he represented, was suddenly elevated to potential power anyway. There's a process through which we go and by which we learn, and I think that's what we're seeing with issues like Venezuela. If someone asked me that question, if someone asked you that question, do you condemn what's going on in Venezuela? Well, what do you mean? What about what's going on in Venezuela? Well, he can't do that. He hasn't got that kind of leeway.
Because the paper will go, he doesn't understand what's happening in Venezuela.
Yeah, to be quite honest, I imagine myself in that position, and I'd like to go on, talk about Hugo Chavez and Simón Bolívar and the history of Venezuela and where they come from. That's not what people want. That's not what he's being asked. He's being asked to come up with a soundbite
in 10 seconds.
He's being asked. He's being demanded to answer yes or no. Yeah. And of course, that's how often can you do that? Would you like a cup of tea? Yes, that's about it, really.
I know. Very well put. So here we're getting response by text and on Facebook to what you were saying earlier on in response to Michael in Hale over the whole Northern Ireland thing. And here's one response that says, referring to Jeremy Corbyn, he is traitorous, a nasty person with no regard for soldiers or our head of state. All he does is appease all voters with his lies, anything to get votes. Very nasty individual. That's what people say. How do you respond to and again, we go back to what I was originally saying, to this personal attack that is what politics has become?
There's a kind of mixture there of personal animosity and something else, and that something else is interesting because I'm sure the person who said that, of course they're very free to say what they like. You know, it has never met Jeremy Corbyn. I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn hasn't kicked their cat, you know, and so on. But we get this vehemence. Where did that come from? Why would you believe this quiet little bloke with a beard is a nasty person? Out of all the panoply of people we have in the world offered up to us, is it really possible to believe this is the heart of all evil? He's not running North Korea, for example.
Well, it's funny you should say. It's funny you should say he's not running North Korea, because a lot of people argue that the Labour Party he wants to lead may not be the Labour Party that actually exists. Because let's just look at the history of it slightly. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't even going to be included on the ballot until a number of more centrist, slightly left of centre Labour MPs were convinced that it would be the right thing to do to have him on the ballot. Then bear with me here, then an organisation called Vote for Jeremy, Elect Jeremy / Momentum, encourages people to join the Labour Party, and suddenly Jeremy Corbyn from nowhere becomes the leader of the Labour Party, which now has to change to reflect him rather than the Labour Party that he was elected to lead. That sounds not unlike a coup.
No, it isn't. It's that there's very strange pictures painted of this process. Like these ardent kind of undercover people coming in and plotting and so on.
Well, do you first of all agree that people were convinced to include him on the ballot because he was an old left winger and
I think that's to their great credit. I mean, I think that's people demonstrating they actually do believe in democracy.
And then they didn't even vote for him, those MPs. They publicly claim they didn't, even though they nominated him. Yeah. They didn't even vote for him.
No, I think they were exercising an excellent sense of democracy, and good for them. Because think if that hadn't happened, all the hundreds of thousands of people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn would have had no other vote to go. And they'd have been effectively disenfranchised, which is a feeling a lot of us get, especially in Cornwall. I think we feel like there isn't anyone for us to vote for. That was a feeling that I particularly had. I mean, the thing to realise about this is it's not that suddenly these people have suddenly crept out of some horrible hole. These are ordinary people we've joined in our hundreds of thousands. At that time I had I paid the small amount which allowed me to register to vote as a member of Unite. And once Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, I thought I actually want to be involved in this because I think we've got the only chance I've ever had in my lifetime to actually seriously change the feeling in this country. Away from this hopeless feeling that things are getting worse all the time. I mean, today the focus is on the NHS. Who has confidence and faith that actually things are going to get better in the NHS as things are? We need to change, and this is the feeling that brought us in. There's nothing sinister about it. It is democracy. The greatest thing we've got.
I would like to share with you what you feel the future of the UK could be under a Labour government led by Jeremy. Before I do, Jim from St Ives has been hanging on the phone for a little bit. Jim, you're not a great lover of Corbyn, is that right?
He's probably quite a reasonable fellow to talk to, but his views, in my opinion, are totally flawed.
In what way, Jim?
Because I've been in business over the years, and whenever I've borrowed money, I've had to pay it back. Now, I've never got out of debt by borrowing more money. So, that is this, and I've never seen a socialist government go out of power in 70 years that I can remember when we were in the black. We've always been heavily in the red. And of course, then the Conservatives come in and try and pay back some of the money, and they're accused of austerity. It's absolutely ridiculous to me. If I'm overdrawn at the bank, I have to pay it back.
Jim in St Ives, thank you. Paul, that must be a refrain that you hear fairly often. You know, Labour come in, they borrow heavily, they spend heavily, they make major promises, even in the good times, even through all the Blair years, didn't save a darn dime, and when the rest of the world went, we joined them.
For a start, historically, if you actually look at the figures, Labour governments borrow less and repay more than Conservative governments. That's not me saying that. That's statistically true. The national debt decreases under Labour more than it does under Conservative governments. I think the analogy with the business isn't really an accurate one. You know, it's the same as the one we're always presenting. Well, if in our house, you know, we have to spend more than we have and we borrow money, then we're going to be in a mess. No, the analogy should be if you live in a house and in the cellar of the house is a printing press where you print the entire currency that the household uses. That's the equivalent. And so the household budget model, I mean, with all due respect to Jim, the simple business model really doesn't really work there. But historically, Jim's a bit out of line there.
So do you suggest then, Paul, that having the printing press in the cellar means that all you have to do is press the on switch and print more money as and when you need it?
That's called quantitative easing. And that's what's been going on ever since the banking crisis in 2008. And I mean, it's really important to remember, as you rightly pointed out, it was a worldwide crisis that caused the crash. It was beginning in America with the subprime mortgages and so on, and then the banking system being what it is, then catapulted around the world. It was nothing to do with Tony Blair, as he did, doubling the spending on the NHS, for example, and increasing the pay of teachers and recruiting more teachers. That did not bring down the world economic system. How could it?
Paul, very quickly and finally then, so we have an election whenever it is, and Labour make it, led by Jeremy Corbyn. What do you think is the first thing he would do?
Start trying to rescue the NHS, for example, which is why he's here today. And that'll be very early. We've got to get it back on its feet. We've got to get it, not only increasing the funding, restoring the morale of staff and the number of the staff, and just making it adapt for the changing circumstances of life. It's a question of priorities, and the NHS is obviously going to be a primary one. We love it. It's a symbol of civilization. It's our major achievement, and that's where he'll go.